Hey, welcome back to the garage, everyone. All right, so today, while we're waiting on the old Corvette engine to be fully rebuilt, it's probably going to take another week or two. I've been thinking about making a different kind of video for a little while now. As you know, this channel concentrated heavily on classic Mercedes restoration, especially this old W126. And I've got to thinking, I said, you know, it's been a while since I made a Mercedes video. So today I've got my notes in hand, and we're going to run down through all of the things that I had to do to make this thing into an awesome daily driver. I mean, you know, you can daily drive a Corolla, you can daily drive an Accord, you can daily drive a Malibu. But daily driving a classic Mercedes? Now that's class. So you guys stick around, we'll be right back after these important messages. All right, that's what you get when you record your intro on one day and the rest of the video on another day. It's been raining and anyway, so here we go. I guess we'll start off. I have tons of notes that basically I just sat down and just started thinking and writing, you know, about everything that I've done to this car to get it ready, or to get it to a point that I was happy with, you know, daily driving it. So let's just go ahead and dive right in here. So fuel flow. If you have a diesel, fuel is everything. It is the most important thing to make your classic Mercedes run properly. So we'll start in the tank. If you buy an old classic Mercedes, the minute you get it home, I would pull the tank screener out and make sure it's clean and replace it if necessary. So there's a screener underneath the bottom of the tank where the fuel comes out, and there's a flexible hose there. You know, remove the screener. It's got an O-ring on it. You could probably reuse it and just replace the O-ring if it's in, you know, pretty good shape. If the screen is really dilapidated or corroded or whatever, you know, you'll have to replace it. You don't really need any special tools for that job. Some claim that you do, but not really. Just a large open-end wrench will get the screener out. It's just a really large hex head on it. Probably easier to just go ahead and buy the new flex hose, clip the hose and drain the tank, get a big wrench in there and take the strainer off and the hose along with it. Once you get it out, clean it up, replace it, do whatever you need to do. But when you reinstall it, there's no reason to put it in there, you know, really, really tight, because it's a delicate piece of kit, really. And there's an O-ring that does the job of the sealing. So just get it pretty snug and it'll be fine. I'm sure there's a torque rating somewhere in the service manual. But replace the flex line along with it, because cars that are 40-something years old, you know, rubber deteriorates. So enough about that. So if your screener has black goopy stuff on it, that's algae. Algae love diesel fuel. So if you have algae on your screener, you have a bigger problem, okay? You're gonna need to put an additive into your diesel fuel tank to kill the algae. And they make some stuff. You can get it at the parts house. It's a very common problem for any diesel-powered vehicle. So you're going to need to get that black algae out of there. You can also see it in the pre-filter up in the engine bay. Another source of leaks is a very minor one. Here at the fuel filler, there is an overflow. And that little hose is rigid and it can pop off. And if you spill some diesel fuel when you're fueling, which you really shouldn't do, you should try to avoid that. Instead of leaking down that hose and dripping onto the ground, don't tell anybody, it will drip into your trunk, and you'll smell diesel fuel in your trunk. So keep that in mind as well. All right, let's go ahead and finish up our little discussion on fuel. In this old diesel, you have a pre-filter right here. It's really easy to see. You can see in there, and you can tell whether or not you've got rust in your fuel or algae or what have you. Replace this often, you know, 2 or 3 times a year at least. Here's your primary filter. Pretty easy to get on and off. You're going to want to make sure that you have the properly sized O-rings and crush washers here. Otherwise, this will leak, and it will actually decrease your economy and your power, because if this leaks, you have a little bit less fuel pressure in your system, and it will decrease your power. Also, these diesel return lines, tend to leak. If you have to remove them for any purpose, just buy a new line, cut new line, and put it on there, because if you don't, it will leak. Fuel injectors. If you have a lot of injector nailing, a lot of noise from your engine, you may need to calibrate your injectors. You'll need a pop pressure testing system for that. You can get the properly sized shims from a company called McMaster Car. They're fairly inexpensive. And all of the things that I'm talking about on the video today, you can just do a search in my video list, and all of these topics will pop up. Everything I'm talking about today has been fully covered in one of my previous videos. Another area where you might have a leak, which is pretty uncommon really, is on these delivery valves on top of the pump. Don't be messing around here if you don't know what you're doing. If you think you have a leak here, you really need to read the factory service manual and watch some videos and whatnot before you dive into this. If you don't want to get down in there, because next thing you know, you start screwing it up, and before you know it, you're going to need a new pump, or you're going to need to have a professional calibrate your pump. Because if you screw this pump up, you've got to send it off to a proper diesel fuel place that has a calibration machine that can handle this thing. One other thing about fuel real quick, we're going to step back here to the fuel filler door. Now, I'm going to talk about water in your fuel. So for a long time, when I opened this up, I would see rust on this cap. And there was water in the fuel system. It was really hard to get rid of, but ultimately I figured out a way to do it. And I could see water droplets here, it would condense out. It was a real pain. But ultimately, the way I got the water out of the fuel system, on a nice hot summer day with the car sitting in the shop, I opened the fuel filler door, took the cap off the filler, okay, and I got a small fan about that big, and I set it on a stool next to the car, and I let that fan draw air away from the fuel filler on the car, not towards it, away from it. And what that did was, it put a very, very slight vacuum, an air draw from the tank, okay? Now, this had the effect of a low pressure region inside the tank, and I kept this fan on for like a couple of days, several days. The water in the fuel system evaporated out and was drawn out of the tank. And ever since I did that, I haven't had any problems with water in my fuel tank. So I let that run for several days like that. And then I put the cap back on there, buttoned everything up, filled it up with fuel, and I haven't had a problem since. So that's enough about fuel. Let's move on to our next topic. All right, in one of my other videos, you saw me remove the EGR valve. Now, you know, this is probably controversial. You don't want to do this on a modern car, clearly. But, you know, for the few amount of classic cars that are driven in this world, it just doesn't matter. An EGR on a diesel is just stupid, especially a mechanical diesel like this. They blew smoke out the tailpipe when they were brand new, off the line, off the factory floor, okay? They don't have DEF. They're not going to be any cleaner than what they are. They get fantastic mileage, but they are what they are. They're reliable. They'll run for 1,000,000 miles, okay? So I'm going to get off that soapbox. I'd just get rid of the EGR and plug it up. Bought a kit from Lerms, a small business guy, seems to be a nice fellow. The product's good. It came with a cap to plug into the exhaust manifold and the intake. The EGR system is gone. I plugged up all the vacuum routing, and I rerouted the vacuum on the car to compensate for it. And again, that's in a previous video as well. And I actually covered my vacuum routing in a diagram on the computer, so if you want to check that out, look for that EGR and vacuum review video. Now, another item that I actually have removed a lot of stuff from this engine, because all it did was make the car difficult to drive. That's pretty controversial, and if you're a purist, I'm somewhat of a purist, but for the emission stuff on this engine, I'm not. I just don't care. There's a little pressure relief valve of some sort. I can't recall the name of it. I'll be perfectly honest with you. It was right here, okay? Now, this had to do with the turbo, and supposedly, I think it would keep you from overboosting and whatnot, and I think it worked in conjunction with the ALDA valve. This valve here has been completely removed. The ALDA has been completely removed. Now, they say, oh, the ALDA is an altitude adjustment thing. It keeps the engine from, I guess, running too rich at high altitude. But in reality, the only thing it really does is keep your engine from running properly. If you're a Mercedes diesel, if you have to floor it to make it move, it's your ALDA, okay? So your ALDA is either, one, completely non-functional, or two, the O-ring in it is bad. You take the ALDA apart, replace the O-ring, and it should restore its function. And messing with the screw on the top may or may not do anything, to be honest with you. So I chose to just remove mine because it is filled with a pod inside there, which has a vacuum on it. And it has a spring-loaded action, sort of, okay? And I'm not going to go into the function of the ALDA in itself, but it's covered in a previous video. I will say this, if the vacuum in that little pod goes away, or that pod is cracked such that there's no longer a vacuum inside it, it will no longer be able to regulate the fuel flow properly in and out of the main pump. So I simply removed mine, and the end result of me removing my ALDA was it drives like a normal car now. It has tons of power. It has the power of a 120 horsepower engine, because that's what it's rated at. It doesn't smoke any more or any less than it ever did. For those who say if you remove your ALDA, you know, you're going to cause excessive smoke, well then I would challenge you to go take a look at the Motor Trend retro review of the Mercedes 300 SD. I believe this video was made in around the 1982-1983 time frame, and they reviewed a brand spanking new car. And you watch that video closely, it was blowing black smoke out the tailpipe, okay? Brand spanking new. So there's a sense of realism here, folks. All right, enough about that. All right, let's move back here and talk about rust in the back area here. So the primary area for rust in these cars in the rear is in at the bottom of the rear window channel, okay? Now, I've repaired this on this car, and this piece of metal right here is actually a plate, okay? And this seal in this rubber seal on the window can go bad, water can get down in there, and it will rust this thing out over time. So if you're going to buy one of these cars, probably one of the first things you're going to want to look at is you pop the trunk, take a look for rust here, and look up underneath this tray here and see if you can find rust. If you see a great deal of rust, then clearly that's a negotiation factor in your price. I put in a very long video series where I pulled this apart and I repaired it. It took several months. Another very common area of rust are these wheel wells. I guess you want to call them wheel wells on either side of the trunk. It's the low portion, okay? So what happens is the seals on these taillights will go bad, and rainwater will get in here, run down in here, and there will be rust holes in the bottom of the trunk. Yeah, so if you're going to buy one of these cars, pull the trunk back, pull the carpet back, make sure that it's not rusted inside there. So, and as a matter of fact, this car has a minor hole there, and I think there's one over there as well. I just haven't gotten around to fixing it yet. Shame on me. And there is a big whopper of a rust hole right here. This is the only, eyesore. I try to ignore it, but the more I look at it, the more I realize I'm going to have to repair that. I'll have to take the bumper off, cut this out, put some new sheet metal in there and paint it. So it'll be a big job. And the last thing I want to say about rust is the battery tray. I think anybody that knows anything about these cars already knows all this stuff. So the battery tray rusts a lot because it's just susceptible to it because of the battery acid. And also the water drains on either side, they can get stopped up with leaves and stuff. So you want to make sure you check that once in a while. Otherwise, you're going to have the inside of your fenders are going to be rusted out. All right, another area that I had to address was the instrument cluster. So these things are notorious for having this speckled dot look all over it. And there's been a lot of theories floating around, and all of them are wrong. What's happens here is the plasticizers that were used when they created the plastic housing at the factory, the plasticizers start to condense out, and they just sort of sprout out into these they look like growths. That's the reason why people think it looks like a fungus or an algae or a mold or something. That's simply not the case. It's It's simply a product of the plastic manufacturing process. Now what you can do is, what I did was I removed this thing. I sandblasted it, not in sandblast, soda blasted it with some Arm & Hammer baking soda, and basically repainted it. And the most tricky, the tricky part of this was this clear plastic cover. Removing that and reinstalling it without breaking it. That was a nightmare. So that took a lot of patience. Next up is interior wood trim. I did a restoration of all the wood trim in this car. This wood trim is multi-layered. There's wood, a layer of aluminum on top of that, and then finally the veneer over the top of that. There's no need to sand out all of the color. You can leave the color in there. I did delaminate all 3 layers, and I relaminated them with JB Weld. And I used dark walnut stain from Minwax dark walnut stain, and I used regular Minwax polyurethane, just brushed on, and it looks amazing. So, and it didn't cost a whole lot of money. You can do it yourself at home. You can do that. Okay, just practice on some scrap wood, but you can do that. Vacuum pods. All of the flips and the flaps and everything in the vacuum climate control is controlled by these vacuum operated pods, and they're notorious for breaking and just giving out, and the rubber gives up. You can have them actually. You can buy replacements. You can actually buy kits to rebuild them if you can get them out of there. I have replaced one, the one up in here behind the glove compartment. It controlled how the defrost and these vents and the defrost work with one another. There's one in the back, way back here, I haven't replaced yet. I think it might be going out. Not quite sure about that, but whatever. Everything seems to work fine. The air conditioner works great. I'm not going to worry about it right now. The front steering and suspension on this car has been completely rebuilt. If you want to make a classic car drive like new, rebuild the steering and suspension components. You will be absolutely amazed at the outcome. There are a lot of bushings in the front suspension. The large ones in the back that do the brake stabilization, those can be quite difficult to replace. So if you're not handy, I would probably, you can buy whole units with the bushings already in them. That might be the way to go. The front wheel bearings are easy to do. They're just like any wheel bearing on any other car. Those are not hard at all. The front sway bar, you need to be careful with the front sway bar. If you're replacing the upper control arm, it bolts to the end of the sway bar. The end of the sway bar has a hole in it and it's threaded. Now that's notorious for rusting. Now, if you screw that up and break that off, if you break off the tip of your sway bar and you have to replace your sway bar, you're looking at dismantling the entire front end of your car. Do not screw up the front sway bar, okay? Don't do it. If it does break off, or if it gets so rusty, find somebody, a machinist that can help you, maybe do some welding on the car, tap the hole, make a new hole in the end of the sway bar, something like that. You do not want to replace that sway bar. You don't want to try to pull it out of the car. I looked in the factory service manual and it quotes something like 20 hours of labor to do that. It's just ridiculous. The lower ball joint, there is a special ball joint tool for that from Mercedes. If you don't want to spend the money for that thing, because it's pricey, you can do it with a rented ball joint tool, but you have to take the rubber boot off of the ball joint to do it. It's a big hassle. That's the way I did these. And if you use the factory ball joint tool, it's quite an elaborate setup with a press, and the shaft is a long shaft. And I tell you what, check out John Woods at Woods and Barclay. He's done a lot of the lower ball joints with the proper tool. He knows precisely how to do it. Go check out one of his videos and you'll learn a lot, I think. Rear wheel bearings. Very, very difficult job. The amount of torque that it takes to get the wheel bearing set up off and back onto the car is huge. You need special tooling. You need a special socket. You need to read the factory service manual on this procedure, because it is not for the faint of heart. To do mine, I used a floor jack actually, and a long pry bar and a pipe, and it was fairly complicated. And the rear wheel bearing kit can be a little bit hard to find. So if you think you have a bearing going out back here, you need to do your homework on this. But again, I did a video on that as well, and take a look at it. It might help you out in the future. Sliding roof. The sliding roof is made by a company called Webasto. They make roof stuff throughout the entire automotive industry. They've been around a very long time. And the sliding roof mechanism in these cars is very, very good, very well engineered, and it should work flawlessly. If it doesn't, there's a couple of things you want to check. Okay, the motor for this thing is right back here, just right inside there. The problem with my sliding roof, when I hit the button, the roof started making, I heard this clicking noise, and it was going, it was moving in a jerky fashion. Well, there's a cable that goes from the motor, it snakes its way through the car up to the sliding roof. Inside the motor, where that cable moves back and forth, there's some teeth, there's a little bracket, and there's various bits and pieces that hold that cable into the gears of the motor. Okay, if that stuff loosens up, it cannot grab the cable properly, and you'll see a jerky motion. If you see a jerky motion in your sunroof, the very first thing I would go do is look at the motor. Pull it out of there, make sure all the parts are there. It may just need tightening up. They get kind of loose over time. Also, there's a clutch on the outside. Learn how the clutch works, because when you get to the end of the run, when you press the button and you fully open the roof, or when you fully close it, that's when that clutch comes into play, because when you get to that end of the run, you get resistance, that clutch starts to slip so it doesn't tear the motor up. That's the whole purpose of it. So you want to set your clutch properly as well. If you want to take the cable in and out of your sunroof, don't do it. Go look at my sunroof series. Taking the cable out is not hard. Putting it back in is a monumental nightmare. Heed my words. And some people say, oh, my sliding roof is moving slowly. I need to grease the rails. That's bullcrap. I don't believe that no more than a man in the moon. It's got to do with your motor and that cable in there, okay? That motor and that cable, those are very strong pieces. And that's where your main lubrication pieces are. You know, there's some lube here, okay, but it's very minimal. Lubricating these rails on this sliding roof, in my opinion, just really won't do a whole lot. Also, there's a little felt rail here. You can see mine poking up a little bit. It didn't quite get all the way down in there, but that's fine. It doesn't bother me. But that little felt rail, those little guys are pricey. So you're going to get sticker shock if you have to replace these, because they usually rust up. You're going to get sticker shock when you try to replace those, so just keep that in mind. Steering wheel lock. Most likely it's your key, in my opinion. The key on a 40-something-year-old car wears out. It just does. And when you try to put your key in and turn things, and you've got to wiggle and jiggle and jerk and all that kind of stuff, the very first, do not pass go, do not collect $200. Okay, that's a Monopoly reference if you didn't get that. Anyway, go to the dealership, order a new key, and give them your VIN. They're available. Just go buy a new key. Give that a try first. It's because it's like, I don't know, 30 or 40 bucks. If you can just replace the key and make everything work properly, by all means, that's your quickest, cheapest option. The steering lock mechanism is a detached unit separated from the steering column, and the way those two interact with one another and interact with the key itself, all of that stuff is very haphazard and complicated. Okay, just take a look at my previous videos on this stuff where I explain it in detail. If you have to replace your lock cylinder, you better make sure you're doing it properly. Otherwise, you're going to be drilling out the lock cylinder, okay? You need to exercise a lot of caution there. Now, the steering lock on these cars is quite different from, I guess, what you'd see over here in an American car, especially with GM. The GM and many other American makes, the steering lock is inside the column. I suppose there's pros and cons of each method, but I'm going to say the GM style steering lock is probably a lot easier to deal with. It seems to be a bit more robust. Just an opinion, don't get bent out of shape. Door strikers. Fairly inexpensive if you buy the Chinese units. If you buy the real units, you're going to just take out a loan. They're just stupid expensive. So what I did was I kept the exterior metal part and I took the Chinese rubber and brass bits out of the aftermarket part and transplanted them into the original metal part. There's no real reason to change the metal part. The only part that goes bad is the rubber part inside, right? So, and then clearly put a pencil mark around it when you put it back together, and that's what you get. Vacuum locks. Most of the time, the problem resides in the pump in the trunk next to the spare tire, okay? I found them to be extremely reliable. Now that vacuum locking system locks all the doors, it locks the trunk, and it locks the fuel filler cap. The only thing that was wrong with mine was the pump was missing. When I bought the car, the pump was simply missing. I bought one on eBay, put it in, and everything just worked. It was just fantastic. Common electronics failure points. Cruise control. The #1 problem is the cruise control amplifier module located under the dash next to the steering column. If your cruise control doesn't work on your classic Mercedes, don't look anyplace else. Just replace that control box, and I'm 99% sure it will fix your problem, okay? Now, getting that thing in and out of there is a real hassle, but it's a good clean fix. After you change it, it will work. Also, one last thing on the cruise controller module. There's one bolt. It comes in from the right-hand side of the vehicle, passenger side if you're in the US, and it goes, and you can't see the bolt, okay? You can't see it. It's hidden, okay? And it goes into a nut on the module that is set in place, or the bracket that is set in place. That nut doesn't move. Don't grab the nut. You can see the nut, but it's not going to move. Do not grab it, because it's like welded there, okay? Doesn't move. There's a bolt that goes into it. That's what you need to loosen, okay? Anti-theft system. Located in the passenger footwell underneath the carpet. Notorious for going bad, and when they do, they'll blow fuses. I kept blowing fuse number 15 over and over and over again. Okay, every time I use the door locks, because when you use the door lock, it activates the anti-theft system. Did a lot of troubleshooting and ultimately found out that that thing had a short in it. I simply disconnected it, pulled the plug on it, left it underneath the footwell, underneath the carpet, disconnected. I haven't had one single problem since. The antenna, the electric antenna. If your electric antenna doesn't work properly, take it out, send it off to, there's a couple of companies that do the rebuild services on them, and get yourself a new antenna and put it in. It's just not hard to do, okay? Don't try to rebuild it. I think, oh, there's some resistance. No, just go get another one, okay? Just save yourself some hassle. Unless you're, if you're a whiz electronics and you're a little crafty, like, you like to get in there and fiddle with stuff, then by all means, knock yourself out. But if you just want an electric antenna that works, just go find a replacement. And that's what I did. I had no issues whatsoever. All right, back in the engine bay. So, valve adjustments on these little 5-cylinder diesel engines. Not a huge deal. Take the valve cover off, get yourself a couple of valve adjustment wrenches. I've done it a couple of times in different videos on this car. The first time I did it, I made the tool myself. I think the second time I did it, I made the tool again as well, I believe, but I made a better version of it. I improved my design. Of course, you can go buy the valve adjustment tools, you know, and you don't have to worry about making it, but you will need the special tool because it goes in here and does that, and does that, and does that. You need to make sure the valves are adjusted properly so that the engine will run properly and last a long time. That's really all there is to that. It'll take you a couple hours to get the job done. It's not a huge deal. There's videos on it and it's documented all over the internet. One particular design, I'm going to call it it's not really a defect, it's just a poor design in my opinion, is the mount underneath this breather. There's an elaborate mount to which this breather is attached. They're notorious for breaking because the diesel engine vibrates a lot. You've probably noticed in some of my early videos, this thing is just wiggling all over the place when I run the engine. And that's because the mount was broken. So ultimately, I replaced it. I bought a factory original Mercedes mount. About a year later, it started to jiggle again. I'm like, what's going on with that? Basically, it was the bolts inside there. They started to come loose. So there's these bolts and then this rubber bushing that's built into the bolt. And it's underneath here, and if you buy the original parts, it's for 3 of them, it's like $100 or some stupid number of money, right? And you can buy the cheap ones, they'll last a week, and then you do it again. It's just ridiculous. So I took those mounting bolts and I dissected them, took the rubber off, and I added I did some welding on it. And basically, I elongated it and made a better version, and I used rubber from a radiator hose, okay, and I put rubber below and above, and I made a much better rubberized, rigidly mounted bolt to mount this thing to the factory mount. So that was documented in a previous video. Go check it out. So far, that little modification has worked out really, really well. Oil lines, if your oil lines are leaking, here's your oil cooler here, there's a line here, and there's a line on the bottom. I changed these oil lines out, and they go to the oil filter housing over there. Getting these fittings off of the oil filter housing is a nightmare, okay? It just is. You need to take your time, get the proper size wrenches, because it will take a long time. And you're probably going to have to raise the engine to do the job properly. If the motor mounts have never been disconnected from your car before, and your car is 40-something years old, you're going to have a hard time with it, okay? Because the bolts are Allen-headed bolts, and they're just stuck in there. They've been in there for 40 years, and they're in there with a lot of torque. And I had to use a 3-foot breaker bar on mine. And I didn't think I was going to get them out of there. But anyway, it was a lot of work. So you'll need to get the motor mounts out so that you can raise the engine to mess with these oil lines, because getting these oil lines in and out of here with all this stuff in place it's a big job, okay? And if you're not handy, you know, find a mechanic to help you with that. All right, so the cooling system on these cars. I no longer run the factory original green antifreeze. I run a Peak branded antifreeze that is kind of a bluish color, and it basically says for classic, you know, European cars right there on the bottle. I'll tell you why I do that. You know, this engine is iron, but the cooling system, thermostat housing, and the water pump and all that stuff, that's aluminum, okay? There's a reason why they changed the coolant over the years between then and now, okay? There's a reason why you can't put the old-fashioned green coolant in modern engines, because of all the different metals. It doesn't work well with aluminum, okay? You get a lot of bimetal corrosion. So that old green coolant, if you take the old green coolant and you combine it with poor grounds, what you get is bimetal corrosion, which is the product of electrolysis. Now, if you have that going on, disconnecting this housing here and the water pump is going to be a nightmare for you, because your bolts are going to be corroded in there and they're going to break off, okay? You're going to need to be very careful when you replace the thermostat and the water pump. So if you don't know anything about how electrolysis sets up in the engine block, we'll go over that real quick. So Your engine needs to be grounded to the car and vice versa. The electrical system in the car needs to find its way back to ground. Now, it will do that whether you like it or not, okay? And that might involve finding its way through the engine block. So if your ground over here underneath your battery and elsewhere in the car, if they're corroded and they don't work properly, you'll have current flow in the car where it shouldn't be. And if you have excessive current floating around inside the engine block, okay, and you've got water inside the engine block, what happens when you get electricity and water and metal all in the same place? You get electrolysis. That's how they make that HHO, hydrogen gas. So, and it ruins the metal. It extracts all the minerals out of the metal, and it ends up inside the coolant, and all the metals merge together. They basically weld themselves together. That old green coolant just basically exacerbates that problem. In my opinion, I don't think that you should run the green coolant in these cars. I think you should run a modern coolant that is designed specifically to function where you have aluminum and iron together in the same environment. I haven't had any problems with the blue coolant. It runs great. I don't have any leaks. So anyway, enough about that. Let's move on. All right, engine rear main seal. Every combustion engine, nearly every combustion engine, has a rear main seal. If you're on most engines, you can crawl up underneath the car and take the oil pan off, take the main bearing cap off, and replace the seal. Take you a couple of hours if you know what you're doing, and you go on about your business. If your classic Mercedes leaks oil from the rear main seal, you'll see it. It'll be an oil leak between the engine and the transmission. I want you to keep this in mind. If you think you're going to go ahead and replace it, you have to take this engine out. Okay? Rear main seal replacement is an engine out job. Mine leaks, and it's going to continue to leak. Because unless I find something that's badly wrong with this engine, I'm not going to pull it out of the car just to change the rear main seal. If I'm going to take this motor out of the car, the engine is going to get rebuilt. Okay, so I'm not going to do that. If you are interested in that whole process, John Woods at Woods & Barclay has a fabulous series on rebuilding one of these engines, and that includes replacing the rear main seal. But in the meantime, I'm going to enjoy a rust-free undercarriage. Drive shaft rubbers with cracks. So the reason why these Mercedes cars, and Volkswagen too, and a lot of European makes, are so smooth is because of the rubber connection between the drive shaft and transmission and the drive shaft and the rear differential. American cars didn't do this. I don't know why. I guess just to save cost, really. But that is the primary, in my opinion, the primary reason why they just feel so smooth when you press the accelerator pedal. It's just something about it. And it's those rubber discs. You're going to need to inspect those. If you see any cracks on them, if you see little bitty cracks, that's not a big deal. But if you see them, they start to open up, it's time to replace them. So keep that in mind. And it's not a hard job. Let's see, rear axles. The primary reason you want to mess with your rear axles is because they'll start to leak. The rubber around the joint will deteriorate, and there's water dripping in that pipe, by the way, behind you. So I don't know if you can hear that or not. But it's been raining, so you know. So if that rubber on those joints starts to crack, all the grease will come out, and basically before long you're going to have an axle joint that's just destroyed itself. So if you see wetness on those joints, take that. You'll need to keep an eye on it, right? So you got two options: take the axles out and simply replace them with rebuilt units that you buy from someplace else, or you can choose to replace the rubber boots yourself, and you can do it. It's hard work on these Gen 1 Mercedes. Replacing that rubber boot is a hard job. And again, I have a video on it, so check it out if you're interested. There's also a seal that goes into the differential. When you replace the axle, you might as well change the seal at the differential as well. But getting the axle in and out of the car is fairly difficult. There's not a lot of room there. As a matter of fact, Mercedes had a special tool that would go into the exterior and force the axle that way so you could move it past the rear wheel bearing assembly without tearing anything up. Now I found a way to do it with a pry bar, you know, using a little bit of wits, but it wasn't easy. And yeah, I think you can, and you could probably look up Vito's garage. He's done the job a lot of times, and he can tell you it's a struggle. And he does it laying on the ground, and I had a lift, and I was still struggling. So Vito, kudos to you, my brother. So yeah, there's another Mercedes site if you're not aware. I mean, I'm sure everyone who is into classic Mercedes is aware of Vito's garage. He's a great guy. Serving the country well in the military, so thank you for that, Vito. And works hard. He is one of the most passionate automotive enthusiasts I've seen in a very, very long time. Seats. These seat springs are notorious for breaking, right? And it will not be a pleasant experience sitting and driving your car with torn up seats. Don't try to repair springs. It's just a silly endeavor. Go find yourself a good salvage car set of seat springs. Take the seat out of the car, replace the springs, reinstall it. You won't regret it. While you're in there, grab yourself an extra inch of foam. You can get it at a place like Hobby Lobby and put an extra inch of foam on top of the seat, and you'll have something that's really nice. That's a good sound, isn't it? Tires on the Gen 1 Mercedes are 14-inch. It's getting hard to find 14-inch tires. I'm not even sure you can get them in Michelin anymore. I've got some Cooper on here, but I think Cooper quit making this tire. I had to go, the last one I looked at was this is a Falcon on the back. I had a flat. Ran over a piece of debris and got a flat, and the guy said he couldn't replace it with the Cooper, which, by the way, the Cooper tire was made in USA. I kind of like that. There's a reason I was running them, and they're a fine tire, but they just don't make the 14-inch one anymore. So the Falcon, I believe, is a South Korean tire, and they're fine. They're great tires. So if you need some tires for that are 14-inch, the Falcon is the way to go. I think you can see that I've done a lot of stuff to this car to make it a daily driver. And it is a fabulous daily driver. I literally get in this car and go places every single day. I get groceries, I go to the post office, I go to my parents' house, I go to my friend's house, I take it on weekend road trips. Went to Nashville a few weeks ago, no problems whatsoever. Someone with an astute eye may have noticed something. I think this is the original underhood insulation. I believe this is original. It has the factory original sticker there. I don't know, it may have been replaced at some point. I don't really know, but clearly this one is now rotten, and I'm not sure if I'm going to make a video on this or not, but we'll find out here in the near future. I'm going to need to change this out, because if I don't, it's going to get nasty in a hurry. I guess I'll finish off by talking about the party piece of working under the hood of a classic Mercedes. The reason why I love this car so much, you know, they're just designed to be worked on. They're designed to be repaired. There we go, there we go. They're just designed for maintenance. I mean, why would you not do that? Why isn't every car like this? My Jeep was kind of like this, but, you know, why doesn't every car do this? All right, folks, I appreciate you guys sticking around and listening to me ramble and run down memory lane here. I bought this car in June of 2019. It's coming up on 5 years that I've had this car now, and I just can't believe it. As the time has passed very, very quickly. Now, the Mercedes folks noticed a while back that, you know, it's been a long time since I made a Mercedes video. And the reason why is pretty simple, really. I got the car up to the level where I really liked it, and I thought, man, I'm just going to drive it, and I just love it. I daily drive it. Also, I have started to do full restorations of both the Cadillac and the Corvette. The only thing I have left to do on the Cadillac is to repair the air conditioner, and I think I might put some sort of auto leveling rear suspension on to help with the fact that I had to modify the rear suspension to accommodate for the pinion angle problem that we finally figured out. And the Corvette restoration is underway. I'm waiting on the engine to come back from the machine shop. The short block is down there. And they're actually finally got around to it. It's disassembled now. It's in the cleaning process. So, and they do a lot of engines. So I think maybe we might have it back to the shop here in a couple of weeks. After we get the Corvette back on the road, well, what are we going to do then? I'm daily driving this car, and those cars will be restored. What am I going to do then? I might have to buy myself another classic Mercedes and restore it. Anyway, I appreciate you guys sticking around today. You guys have a good one, and remember to enjoy restoring, maintaining, and driving your classic Mercedes. Take the seat out of the car, replace the seat.